This is Video 5. Welcome to Video 5. If you haven't watched the other videos, please watch them first. You might be out of place if you start here. But in the last video, we were talking about the time after the leap and the trial by fire that followed afterwards. All the crazy stuff that happened with the leap into the eternities. And as you can imagine, the types of madness and craziness and rebellion that was inevitable with an indefinite lifespan. There was a lot of learning to do. A lot of learning, and it took a little while to get it done. But I'm going to circle back somewhat now on the gaining in stability and power. I've mentioned that they grew technologically a lot during that trial by fire period. And, it's technological like you might understand, but there's a couple areas that need to be addressed. One of them is genetics. I've talked about genetics before, but I can't overstate the importance of genetics. Now, I've gone over this, and I'm going to keep going over this and going over this because the power of genetics cannot be understated. Overstated. It has a lot of effects on us. Now, going through evolution, I'm sure you're aware that we get a lot of the genes from further on down the gene pool in time. It could be relatives that are somewhat related to us. It could be distant relations. It could be frogs. It could be single-celled organisms that some of the DNA comes from. And these parts of the DNA were designed by processes collectively known as Mother Nature in tough environments to help succeed there. Not done without intent, but the net effect was it was basically designed itself to work in those environments for those specific purposes, and they didn't design themselves to work for the eternities. Now, like I said, at the height of the trial of fire, losses were about 90% of all people born to the society. Over the time, there was a considerable amount of time there. But over the course of a normal life, existing genetics and personal choice might be good enough to live a decent life. But with so much time on your hands and so much artificial temptation, there's artificial drugs, you could do anything without consequence, seemingly. You can certainly have all sorts of relationships you want without any fear of disease. There's drugs without the side effects. There's electronic. Live in a computer for a bit and be completely virtual and have whatever rules you want. But all in all, like I said, it led to disaster. Over the course of long periods of time, there just wasn't... we just couldn't keep going like that. Our genetics and our psychology and all of the whole ball of wax came all together, and it didn't work out well. But enough about that. When we talk about genetics, some of the reasons why it works out, our society works out, and our culture works out the way it does is because our culture is built slowly over the course of years based on the collective wants and needs of the society, the collective values of the society. It all gets put into the culture, and much of that is heavily influenced over the collective genetics and hormones of the people going through it long term. Said it before, if you had different genetics, your culture would be different, because over the long period of time, These things get built into the culture. And when you're dealing with this type of time frame for a single person to live, I mean, it just worked out to be that the genetics of it contributed so much more than we thought. I mean, we don't know that we get stressed when we're in traffic. We know that we don't think very well when we're around someone that we like of the opposite gender. We know that when we get mad, we don't think very well. I mean, all these things we just write off to how our body works, and that's true. But how your body works ultimately goes back to the blueprints, and the blueprints are the genetics, the DNA, the way that it presents itself. It is a very, very deep thing. It controls, these blueprint control literally everything we're doing. Now, when they had to think about what types of genetics fixes that they needed to do, there's psychopaths, the tendencies to not be able to feel emotions or relate to each other. That was something that, I mean, had to be looked into, of course. People that can just take advantage of others without even feeling someone else. But, I mean, think about what we do with genetics. When we look at movies and books, and we think of our genetic advancement, we think of things like X-Men. Faster, stronger, more destructive, more intelligent, more able to psychically take advantage of others, or just be stronger. Because, I mean, as a society, oftentimes we feel out of control. And we want to take control by being better, faster, stronger. But also, this is what we like. This is what we're geared towards wanting. It's to be physically stronger, to be physically faster. And X-Men type of genetics, that's, I mean, face it, that's what we think of. Wisdom, military strategy. I mean, but, I mean, ultimately, what needed to happen, as many of you might be guessing by now, is not better, faster, stronger. We had technology for that. We have plenty of ability to be faster, and what does it matter if we find better ways to kill ourselves? I mean, what's the point? We'd made it. We need to be peaceful now. I mean, at this point, society had nearly destroyed itself many times over and over and over again. We want to find a better way of finishing the job. I mean, and at this time, I'd like to remind you also that they had looked back on the original society that they came out of, and it had already wiped itself out. They didn't finish the job. It had happened because the society itself was too violent and too technologically advanced, and finally gave their Earth too much that it could handle, and they wiped themselves out. So, yeah, better, faster, stronger like X-Men is not something that's necessarily the most important thing there. Gentle. However, with balance. Because if you look around us in the stars, you can see that there's a lot of them. And I haven't gone over too much about what was out there and what's down here and the types of relations we have with other species from other planets. But basically, there are none. None really that we interact with, none that we really have found that are on our level, period. Now, I understand that many of you have seen UFOs of this sort and that sort. There's the bird people, there's the reptilians, there's this, that, and the other. And I'm not denying that you've seen those. In fact, I will tell you for a fact that those are real and they exist. But, real with quotation marks. You have to understand that down here in this environment that we live in, we are not given the truth. We're not given the truth because we can't handle the truth. What have our leaders done to deserve the truth? What has our culture or what has humanity done to deserve the truth so far? It hasn't. there's been times in the past that they tried giving the truth and it's blown up, and I'll tell you about that and when I get to it. But the long and the short of it is, as much as there are none really that have reached our level at this point that we know about in our, close vicinity anyway, that's not to say that they don't exist. We have, of course, examined the close vicinity, but there's a limit to what we're going to do. That you put probes out there, no matter how well you disguise it, someone technologically advanced enough is going to see it. And seeing how much damage and destruction we've observed here and around us and wherever we could observe it, it's not wise to take chances. So, going back to the genetics, part of the genetics that we want is gentler and wiser and more logical, and part of it is not being gullible. We can't be taken advantage of. We need to be a good military strategy. Not, of course, aggressive, so aggressive that we blow each other up, but we certainly don't. There's a fine line there. We don't want to be too aggressive so we blow each other up, but we need to be okay militarily so that we're not just going to be duped into someone taking advantage of us, if that ever comes to happen. And so it's a bit of a fine line there. And of course there's other improvements. I tell you right now, they're just a bit crazy. Crazy because they're, built fairly strongly because they're scientists. They work with genetics. They work with bodies. They make, you're strong. You're physically fit. You're not fat. You look pretty much how you want to look. And that's not bad looking, I can tell you that. And you don't have to sit 5 hours in the gym every day to do it. You do what you want to do. You do what you need to do for family and society. And you don't need to work out in a gym. They got that part taken care of. They got every part of you built like you would want to be built. And there's other improvements. Like improvements to the stresses, improvements to hormones that we're going to go over, improvements to how we relate to each other. But yeah, these improvements needed to happen. Now, so that's what they're working on. As towards the end of this trial by fire period, their genetics had led them to be a more logical race, a smarter race, a race that was a bit more peaceful. There were still some stuff missing, though. The kids were less out of hand, but they were still sometimes, interesting, as kids will be. The types of education they had this for a long time. They had simulators. They had classroom education. They had times they'd go out and observe. They'd have, you name it. Any tactic could be used was used. There's a lot of improvement in the fields of education then as well. But there's also a better tying to the family, because one of the things that happens with, and I know this is going to be a sort of long and me going here, me going there, me going another place, but you're just going to have to go with me because I have to tell it like I have to tell it. So one of the things that leads people off here and there and the other place was found to be basically loneliness. Not exactly loneliness. Some people don't think they're lonely, but over the course of that amount of time, you get, lonely. Even in a group, especially in a group, because what's found out, and they did a lot of studying. They studied a lot of people that never came back. They did look at the people that didn't want to come back, and they observed from a distance, and They observed really close, minute details of what's going on so that they could at least make best use of the data. I know it's sort of, it's sad on one hand that they'd be observing people that they know are just going to go off to their deaths, but we had a whole society we had to think about, and improvements needed to be made, and got to collect data where you can get it, honestly, and in that extreme range of people that are going off being rebellious and what's going through their minds, especially when they just won't return. We offer them to return, and they won't take it. But basically, long and the short of it is this. You can't be with multiple partners over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, just ad nauseum, because basically that part of sex is a drug. And it's a drug that works in certain contexts, but it doesn't work powerfully enough to overcome the loneliness that happens over the long period of time. And no matter who it is, no matter how much that they don't want a relationship, no matter how much they just want that physical pleasure, what happens over the long point of time is if you don't have someone to really, really deeply, deeply, deeply grow mentally intimate with, that you know is going to just stick there, and that really you build lives together and families together and things that mean something, you don't have that grouping, then you basically are alone. I mean, because it's with multiple partners. I mean, no one person means really too much more than the other. Sometimes a little bit, but then you can have kids with one, kids with another. There's not really any family structure. And yeah, there's people that sort of relate to each other, and it's okay. But over the really, really, really long term, you are basically alone. You're alone with people around you. And you're just not able to get the type of meaning that you really deeply need. You need to have some deep psychological, mental, emotional connection with people and your husband and wife, but not just that, a family structure that gets to be really strong and really cohesive and build something more than is just possible with people going here and there and there and there. Not to mention that if you're going here and there and there and there, you're not going to be as emotionally invested in your kids. And, I mean, let's face it, it's really, really difficult to live a life up there, and you need as much emotional support as you can. And having a very solid structure going up and down, like you have parents that are very solid, and your kids have parents that are very solid, and you have children that are very solid together, going up and down. It ties you together in a fabric, basically, that interconnected by deep emotion, by history, by trust, by knowing that you're going to count on people. I mean, it's not, it becomes so much more than just a physical jaunt. I mean, look how much you're giving up for a physical jaunt. You're just a physical romp with who knows whoever you want. You're giving up so much. And even now, I know many of you might not really be able to understand how much. I mean, you would have to really see it over the long term to see what you'd be giving up. But no, a family structure means a lot to us, especially one up there. And this is a part of the education, and it's a part of the strengthening society, because the family structure tended to be one of the natural things that worked out really well. There are hormones there. There are hormones between husband and wife. There's hormones between kids and parents. There's hormones that they were able to beef up, and they did beef them up. Trust me, they did. They beefed them up like crazy. And those types of things were natural, and because these hormones were used in conjunction with trust and history and people that you know that are there, they became so much more than just a a passing excitement with some random person that's just new. The novelty aspect of it wears off. When you have that much time, there's enough people around where the novelty wears off. I mean, who are you going to be with next? Especially with how easy it is to get related to everybody. If, like that. Novelty wears off over the long time. And that's really a part of what the, passion is we have down here is novelty. Once the novelty's gone, then you move on. But over the long, long course of things, especially with memories that don't fade, that novelty's not there. And the thing is, when you have the family, you trade some novelty for stability. Stability, deep passion, and deep meaning between people that are mentally and emotionally just growing together closely. And that was one of the big things that came out of the trial by fire, because that was not something that many people even wanted to do at first. They wanted to just do what they wanted to do. They were free. They could do anything they wanted to do. But it just turned out that the people that survived, the people that made it, the people that wanted to keep going, had others they wanted to keep going for. Everybody that lived through that and that was old enough would have just ended it. Everybody would have. There wasn't one that wouldn't have. Except for the relationships in their lives they had, except for the responsibility that they felt, except for the meaning that they got out of others. And now that they got through it and figured out a way to keep going and do it well, they found a way that really brought them meaning. So let me just get back to the point here for a second. So the point is, learning improved and family improved. There's a reason why you hear and feel so much tying back to the family, and it's because our society needs something to tie it together. It needs a glue. And as much as you might think that being well-intentioned and everybody just singing peaceful, happy thoughts and just understanding what they're doing is wrong is going to keep people in the right direction, it's not. You understand what is right and wrong perfectly. You understand how you affect others could hurt them, but you just don't care. Psychologically speaking, you've gone through enough to where the loneliness and the pain will drive you to do anything, including hurt people intentionally. And having that bond, having that relations between people, boosting what friendship means to you, boosting what family means to you, boosting what being there for someone means to you, and what you feel, it strengthens the bond between those two people, and those two people will not want to hurt each other. And so knowing good from bad, knowing how your actions will hurt somebody, and then also caring deeply about them, that those two things work hand in hand together to make a relationship that works. A relationship with people that don't want to hurt each other and won't. Because the idea of hurting someone you deeply, deeply love is bad. It's really bad. You'd rather hurt yourself at that point. And you don't understand how deep these feelings go and these emotions go. These hormones, they beefed them up. Over the course of a long period of time, you build a really, really, really solid relationship. Much, much more than you can imagine. Between the counseling they have, the changes to the genetics they came up with to make things easier to work, as well as the hormones that are improved. I mean, all that works together to build a new level of friendship, a new level of love, a new level of family that you just can't understand until you felt it. And I mean, going off on another tangent, sorry, but men and women have very different things genetically that drive them apart as well. I mean, men tend to want to do certain things that drive the women crazy, and women do things that drive men crazy. I mean, guys often will have a wandering eye, and girls will often yap about um, everything. So there were also subtle genetic changes to just make it easier to be able to work with each other, so that women can be more sensitive to guys' feelings and guys can be more sensitive to girls' feelings, and that we can truly understand each other. And that, along with the hormones, along with the fact that we're just here together and we have to rely on each other, I mean, all of it just went together, and it builds things amazingly well for the family. That is our rock, it's our stability, and it's the fabric of society. Because the fabric of society is one family. It isn't just a family. It interconnects with others. You have your parents and your parents' parents and your parents' parents all have bonds, and that goes up and down. But then your kids, you have bonds with. The bonds between the kids to the parents were increased. Because in this life, the kids are bonded a little bit to the parents, but it fades and they just go off and they do whatever they want. But they bumped it up a lot. The kids are very bonded to the parents. They respect them deeply because of the history, but they also have the hormonal bonds that really, really tie them together as well. So you don't just have it going down where their parents would do anything for the kids, but you also have it going up where the kids would really, really do anything for their parents as well. And you extend that to brothers, sisters, and a little bit less, and then other relations of, and friends, and every other types of relationship we have in society, and it quickly spreads to everybody. And so, or at least in theory, so you have a bond of love and caring that extends ultimately to everybody. So that, as again, I'm going to just go over this again. You have not just a society with people who would like to be good and understand being good, and in theory be good, and just sort of get what it means to not hurt people, and people that understand their actions and the consequences of it, but also people that like each other and don't want to hurt each other. You have to know how not to hurt each other, as well as want to not hurt each other. Both of those have to go hand in hand. And with the beefing up the family, it did. And so, yeah, they were essential to our long-term health and safety. They still are, and they're going to be. They just are. They're too integral to the way that we found to live. And no one wants to do without it, because it builds a deeper meaning than you can possibly imagine. Going off alone and just being with whoever you want didn't work. It just didn't work. Not to mention that we can look however you want. You want novelty? I mean, you can change your looks if you want. I mean, if it's as simple as looking a little different, that's really easy. You can still keep the same bond and be the same people and change your look subtly. I mean, you can look like whatever you want. So, the downsides of, committing to one person greatly pale in comparison to the upsides. It just turned out. That's just how it worked out. If it hadn't worked out that way, we wouldn't have done it that way. Trust me, it wouldn't have. Now, let's see. Going on here, the political structures. Let's see, what should I talk about next? The political structures and how it's organized there. It's already been half an hour, but you know what? We need to go over this. So how is the society structured? The politics of it, as you can tell, started out, there was basically just a group of associated people that were associated by the fact that they worked in the same corporation or company, whatever you want to call it. There were scientists and geneticists and this and that worked all together on that project. They made the leap. They were there, and then they were all just sort of thrown into the mix. They're not related. At least they weren't. Then their kids, and their kids had kids, and kids had other kids. And as you could see, with such a small group starting out with 500, roughly, the genetics got intermixed a bunch, and then everybody's related to each other. So right at the very, 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 very top, they're not related. But then afterwards, really quickly, everybody's related. Everybody's family. And like you could see those, when families are tied together closely with the amounts of techniques that we have, yeah, that strengthens society. But this is the overall politics of it would be that, yeah, you're connected to each other with families, you're managed with families, the parents are in charge of their children's education, the parents have to follow society rules, but the parents are the ones that are responsible for figuring out how they're going to follow society's rules, get their kids an education, where are they going to put them on earth, what country, what language, even what race, honestly, you know. I beat around the bush with this before, but you remember how I said they got intermixed. The races were gone at that point. It's just a matter of happenstance. With 500 individuals getting started, races get wiped out. So you say, well, how come there's black and white and Mexican and Asian and all these different races here? Well, it's simple, because we are not the same frequency. We're not even the same, you know, some people might even say, well, it's not the same planet. I mean, it's certainly, that's not where we were from, this bodies that you know. But the eternal bodies, the eternal, where we came from as a society there, I mean, we just didn't have the races. And having races again down here, it adds something over the long run. It really does. I mean, not having it anymore over there, we use the races here. We took some genetics, believe it or not. We even took genetics from Neanderthals and the other ones, the ones that came out of the other cave. What was that? Yeah, I'll think of that and talk about it later. But yeah, genetics. It's good to have some variety, and don't worry too much about race here, because you have to look at your own race and say, hey, don't you like some of the experiences that you got? Those are experiences that you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't have been put in that race. So, you know, it's just a method that we can improve the quality of life long run and the amount of variety that we have, because we lost it and we needed to gain some more back. So, you know, a race is not something that you should, you know, hate each other over. It's something that you should embrace, that we finally have some really good diversity here. Some different ways of thinking. More ways of thinking, as long as you can get along with each other, are helpful. But going back to the politics of it. Oh, well, okay, and that might mention, some people might say, well, that means you think that we're all white, just Caucasians, and just that every other race is good. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that they were not any of those races. They were not Caucasian. They were not black. They were not Asians. They were not Hispanics. They were not any of them. They weren't human. They were very closely related genetically, but they weren't any of the above. Generally speaking, like I said, they're a little taller, very physically fit, and you can look whatever you want. And when I say that there's not really race, you can look whatever you want. If you want to be black, you can be black. If you want to be white, you can be white. If you want to be whatever color, fine. You have the ability to look like whatever you want. Our genetic pool is our genetic pool. We can't control that. But we've integrated more and more of some of the other genetics here from the Earth we're on here, this frequency, this dimension, if you will. And that's a good thing. Don't worry so much about defending your race or trying to put down someone else. Diversity is a good thing. We're working towards increasing diversity within certain ranges so that it brings meaning. It's not a bad thing. And I don't think you have to overthink it to the point of saying, this one's better, that one's better. Diversity is better. Having some stuff there that has a bigger genetic pool that you can pull the best things out of each is just a better thing. And if you have to label it saying one thing's better, another thing's better, well, how did you come to that this one's better, that one's better? Did you do it by research? Did you do it by tens of thousands of years of research? Because when I'm talking about genetics and better genetics versus worse genetics, yeah, this is what they do. They will go over tens of thousands of years. They get detailed analysis from data like crazy. And they say that not this race is better, that race is better, but they say, okay, look at this very, very small part of a genome. And this little part here comes from this group of animals ultimately that had this sort of effect when it was back here in natural habitats, and now in advanced environments, this specific little parts of the the genome needs to be adjusted. They're going down to the minute level. There's a lot of redundancy involved, lots of things that we don't think in the genetics have any effect that do. There's lots of redundancy there, like I said. And so basically, you can't say one race is better than others simply because it's too broad. Every single group of, that has significant genetic differences than another will always have better and worse things about them as it relates to the extreme long term. And having larger amounts of gene pools to go and discover things out of means that we just have more tools in our palette to work with. And you could also say, what about if we go through this genetic, say this race and that race and the other race and Homo sapiens and that one that came out of the cave, Denisovans. Yeah, if you take little parts of all of that stuff, why not just do things just brand new? What about artificial genetics? Well, they do use some that didn't exist before. I will admit to that. I'm not going to go too much into it. There's people conspiracies that think about there's stuff I just don't want to get into right now with some elites thinking they're better than everyone else because they have specific elements in their chromosome or in their DNA that would make them unique and come from the aliens or wherever you want to say they were coming from, the Anunnaki or whatever. I'm not going to get into that. Basics. That's all we need. At this point, we've gone over that tons, and I need to get back to the politics of it. So the politics, you have the families. They control the lower level stuff. They control the kid's life. They control, they don't control the kid's life, but they control where the kid gets put. The kid has input in it before they leave as well. They're basically in charge of things within certain boundaries, the boundaries that have been set by society. You have certain types of learning experiences that have been defined and studied, and the parents can choose between quite a large number of different learning outcomes and ways of placing kids so that they can best try to find them. And that is the political structure at its heart, is the family. However, if you go above that, the politics would be at the council level. The council would have and exist of the most senior parents, the ones that have been around long enough to be well invested in this community, the ones that are well invested in terms of emotionally, the time, so much that they, in theory, would not ever want to do something to just hurt any one group, because again, as you're older, you have more people that you're responsible for and more more kids that are in different scenarios, and hopefully you'd play favorites less. So yeah, the older you get, the more likely you will to be joining that council. It's reserved, wise of us that join it. And it's not the bunch of guys sitting around a table. They don't really see the differences between why you should have just a bunch of guys sitting there being leaders. It's guys and girls, whatever. It just doesn't matter. You're older, you're wiser, you've gone through it, and then you're up in the leadership. You won't find the distinction down here where all the politicians mostly are guys. It's just a mix. That's just how it is. You get older, you get wiser, and there you go. That's the council level in a nutshell. In a small nutshell. I'm skipping over quite a lot of the politics now that I'm going to get into later. Above that, you have the founders group. The founders group of scientists that made the initial leap, the ones that are still there. It started out with around 500, like I said. Now there's about 200 to 250. I forget the exact number. I know they told me, but there's so much to remember. I don't remember that exactly. It's somewhere around that 2 to 250. That's the range. I think it's closer to 200. Yeah, there's a lot of them just didn't make it. Just because they were founders, that didn't mean that they were any wiser than anyone else. We owe them a great debt of gratitude, but ultimately many of them are just gone now. Not to be returning. But the ones that are still here, they're pretty much the supreme power in the known universe. They control everything. They are the ultimate. The buck stops here. They are extremely, extremely, extremely well educated, very smart, very good at everything. I mean, there's the amount of psychological operations that they can go on there, the masters of manipulation. I mean, if they wanted to, they could have the scientists down here just sitting drooling in a corner, sucking their thumb. I mean, and not even realizing why. I mean, they're good and they feel the responsibility for everyone, but ultimately, don't underestimate them. They're nice and kind and good for the most part, but you do not know the meaning of smart and organized until you know that group and get on their bad side, because as disorganized as they seem sometimes, it's disorganized like a fox. They know what they're doing. They've had many, 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 many years to get where they're at and stay where they're at. And they are a force that, military speaking, any military, if you're ever listening to this, you're not going to outsmart them. You're not going to out-technology them. You're not going to out-anything them. They will think 1,000 steps ahead of you and 1,000 steps ahead of that. This group has the experience to do it, and the only way of taking them on, and I mean the only way, is positive pressure from a large number of just concerned people over the long run. You're not going to face them militarily. You're not going to face them by outsmarting them. You're not going to face them and take care of anything by trying to out-psyops them. There's no way to do it. Trust me. They are too good at what they're doing. They've had a long time to get there, a long time to improve that, and I talk right now as if you needed to, but the reality is most people won't need to take them on for anything. They do, for the most part, have society's best interest in mind. We will get into things I disagree with the council and the Founders Council are doing, but for the most part, at your level, just listening to this, just understand they have your best interest in mind. For the most part, they've had a long time to see a lot of people fall off, and they don't want to have that happen again, really. They don't want to have people just go off anymore. They're done with that. So they are a force to be reckoned with if you're going to try to cross them, so I advise you not to. The only way if you're going to ever try to cross them is you better get with a lot of friends and you better be right morally. And you better just be out in the open and just come at them with, like back of the bus type stuff, saying, hey, I don't think that you're doing this right. I think this is the moral way to go, and do that loud enough, long enough, with enough group of people, and sway enough people the right way with public opinion, and then you stand a chance. That's the only way you stand a chance. You're not going to out-military them, I guarantee you that. You're not going to out-technology them. But that is the leadership in a nutshell. Very small nutshell with a lot of stuff being omitted. A lot of stuff. Now, we need to get into the education. And so the education of it lends itself, like growing up. When you're born, what happens to you, like as you grow up, when you get certain rights and responsibilities? So what's that? The organization in terms of as you're growing up, because I didn't really cover that at all. I just said, okay, once the parents are in charge. But there's an organization with, when you're first born, when you're young, when you're getting older, and there's a whole structure there that should not be ignored. I'm going to get into that into the next video. I know it's been already 46 minutes or so, and I appreciate the patience that one of you have had listening through this, probably at double or triple speed if possible. I don't know if anybody's listening to it, but either way, if you are, I appreciate you listening. I covered tons of stuff in a very rambling way, so hopefully you get some of it. You'll have plenty of other chances to get all of this in many, 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 many classes to come on the other side. But hopefully this will at least prepare you somewhat for the next discussion and for the ultimate point I have to make with all of these things, and you taking your rightful place and responsibility as a member of society and joining with your voice with mine, ultimately long term, to tell the leaders of our society and the Founders Council that we expect fairness for everybody. They're pretty fair, but there are some things that we still need to fight for. And I will get into those later. I will get into later the next video, the education of the kids and the structures that we go through, the organization of that. See you next video.